The oldest story ever written is not a myth, it's a king list. Carved into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, Sumerian scribes recorded the names of their rulers, how long each one reigned, which city they ruled from, and when their dynasty ended. But the list doesn't start with what we'd expect. It starts with a line that archaeologists spent decades trying to explain away. Before the flood swept over the earth, kingship descended from heaven. Before the flood. That's not metaphor, that's not religion, that's a historical marker. The same way we say before the war or before the collapse. The Sumerians believed there was an entire era of civilization before a global catastrophe erased it, and they wrote down everything they remembered about it. This is what they said. The Sumerian King List was first pieced together from fragments discovered across modern-day Iraq in the early 20th century. The most complete version, known as the Weld Blundell Prism, is currently housed in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. It's a four-sided clay column, small enough to hold in two hands, and it contains one of the most controversial documents in the history of archaeology. The list names 8 kings who ruled before the flood. Their cities, Eridu, Bad-Tibira, Larak, Sipar, and Shurupak, all in what is now southern Iraq. Their reigns are given in a unit called Asar, roughly 3,600 years. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for mainstream historians. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, is recorded as having reigned for 1,800 years. His successor ruled for 36,000. The total pre-flood reign across all 8 kings adds up to 241,200 years. The standard academic response is to call these numbers symbolic, ritual, mythological inflation. But consider the alternative for a moment. What if the Sumerians weren't inflating anything? What if they were preserving, as accurately as they could, records from a period so remote that even they barely understood it? A period when the very concept of time was measured differently? We don't know how the Sumerians calculated Asar. We don't know what unit of time they were actually recording. What we do know is this. They treated the pre-flood period as real history. They named specific kings, specific cities, specific dynasties, and then they wrote, "The flood swept over the earth." After the flood had swept over the earth and kingship had descended again from heaven, kingship was in Kish. A clean break. Before and after. Same document. Same hand. That's not mythology. That's a chronicle. 5 cities are named as pre-flood capitals in the Sumerian King List. Here's what's remarkable. We've found all of them. Eridu is considered by many archaeologists to be the oldest city ever excavated. Located in southern Iraq, it shows continuous occupation going back at least 7,500 years, and possibly further. At its base layers, archaeologists found a type of painted pottery so distinct it has its own name, Ubaid Ware. Below that, the excavation hit water. Shurupak, another pre-flood city on the list, was excavated in the early 20th century. Beneath the standard Sumerian occupation layers, excavators found something unexpected. A thick deposit of water-laid silt. Clean, sterile. The kind of layer that forms when an area is submerged for an extended period. Leonard Woolley, the British archaeologist who excavated nearby Ur in the 1920s, found the same thing. 8 feet of silt, with no artifacts, no pottery, no human trace, and then, below it, an entirely different culture. He called it the flood layer. Above it, the civilization we know. Below it, something older that we barely understand. The Sumerians said their cities existed before that layer. And the archaeology, at site after site, keeps producing evidence of a dramatic, water-related break in the human record. What's buried under the silt of those 5 cities, we don't fully know. We've never dug deep enough or had the technology to do it safely. But it's there. The Sumerians didn't just record king lists, they recorded what the gods told them. Now, before you tune out, understand something. When ancient civilizations said the gods, they were often describing beings who arrived, communicated, gave instructions, and left. Whether you interpret those beings as divine, extraterrestrial, or simply as ancestral memory of an earlier advanced culture doesn't change what was written. What was written is extraordinary. The Sumerian creation texts, most famously preserved later in the Babylonian Enuma Elish, describe a council of beings called the Anunnaki. The word translates roughly as those who from heaven to earth came. These beings, according to the texts, created humanity as a labor force, established the first cities, and governed the earth for an immense span of time. Then came a decision. The lead figure in the Sumerian pantheon, Enlil, decided humanity had grown too numerous, too loud, too chaotic. He resolved to destroy it. Another figure, Enki, lord of wisdom, of deep waters, of hidden knowledge, disagreed. And so Enki did something that appears in virtually every flood tradition across the ancient world. He warned one man. In the Sumerian version, that man is Ziusudra. In the later Akkadian version, he's Utnapishtim. You know the biblical version by another name entirely. Enki's instructions to Ziusudra are specific and technical. Build a vessel, specific dimensions, waterproofed with bitumen. Bring animals, bring seeds, bring knowledge. The flood comes, everything else is destroyed. Ziusudra survives, and then, this is the part that rarely gets discussed, when the waters recede, Ziusudra is granted immortality and placed in a distant land called Dilmun, described as a place where the sun rises, where there is no sickness, no death, no old age. The Sumerians believed the pre-flood knowledge survived, that it was preserved deliberately by someone who saw the catastrophe coming and made sure at least one person, and whatever he carried, made it through. This is where the ancient texts stop being just interesting and start being scientifically significant. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus was that a global flood was impossible, geologically unfounded. A myth inherited across cultures because humans like dramatic stories about water. Then came the 1990s. Geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, working at Columbia University, published research proposing that around 7,600 years ago, roughly 5,600 BCE, the Black Sea underwent a catastrophic flood event. Before this point, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, significantly lower than the Mediterranean. Then, the natural land barrier at what is now the Bosphorus Strait gave way. Mediterranean seawater poured through at an estimated rate of 200 times the volume of Niagara Falls. The lake flooded. Coastal settlements, potentially thousands of them, were submerged almost overnight on a geological timescale. That event would have displaced enormous populations across a vast region. Those people would have carried their stories with them. And those stories, retold across generations, across continents, across thousands of years, would have described exactly what every flood myth describes. A world-ending deluge, water coming from nowhere, everything lost. But the Black Sea flood, as dramatic as it was, is regional. Then came the Younger Dryas research. Around 12,900 years ago, the Earth was emerging from the last ice age. Temperatures were rising. And then, very suddenly, in the space of decades, temperatures dropped sharply back into near-glacial conditions. The Younger Dryas period lasted about 1,200 years. What caused it is still debated, but the leading hypothesis now involves a cosmic impact, a fragmented comet or asteroid striking the Laurentide ice sheet over North America, triggering massive flooding from meltwater, a sudden drop in temperature from ejecta blocking sunlight, and widespread fires across the northern hemisphere. The evidence, elevated levels of platinum, iridium, and nanodiamonds found in a thin sediment layer at sites across 4 continents, all dating to the same moment, around 12,900 years ago. That's the geological signature of an impact event. And it coincides almost exactly with what the Sumerians and dozens of other ancient cultures describe as the age before the flood. Here is the question that keeps researchers awake at night. If there was an advanced civilization, or even several, existing before 12,000 years ago, what happened to their cities, their infrastructure, their knowledge? The answer, in 3 words: sea level rise. At the peak of the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, sea levels were approximately 120 meters, nearly 400 feet, lower than they are today. Vast coastal plains existed that are now entirely submerged. The Persian Gulf was largely dry land. Large portions of the South China Sea, the area between Britain and continental Europe, the continental shelves off every major coastline. These are exactly the kinds of environments where early civilizations would have settled. River deltas, coastal plains, fertile land near water, and they are now, all of them, underwater. We have barely explored them. The technology to do so has only existed for a few decades. And what we've found in the limited exploration that has occurred is genuinely unsettling. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Kambat, sonar surveys conducted in 2001 detected structures at a depth of 40 meters, straight walls, right angles, what appeared to be a grid layout. Artifacts recovered from the site were dated to approximately 9,500 years ago, pushing the timeline of Indian civilization back thousands of years before any mainstream estimate. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument, a stepped stone structure at 25 meters depth, has been debated for decades. Some geologists say it's natural. Others, including the Japanese geologist who first documented it, say the right angles and terraced formations are inconsistent with natural erosion. Near Cuba, a private research team scanning the ocean floor detected what appeared to be a large urban grid at a depth of 700 meters, far too deep to have been above sea level in any period of modern human existence, which raises questions we don't yet have answers to. The Sumerians said kingship descended from heaven before the flood, and that the flood buried it. The sea level data says, yes, there are vast territories of pre-flood coastline now sitting under the ocean. We've barely looked. One of the most persistent elements across Sumerian texts is the concept of the Me. The Me, pronounced May, were described as sacred tablets or objects containing the fundamental rules of civilization. Not moral rules, operational rules, the instructions for how to run a society. The Me listed things like kingship, priesthood, descent into the underworld, the scribal arts, music, metalworking, masonry, wisdom, truth, the art of war, the art of law. They were enumerated, catalogued, treated as objects that could be physically held, stolen, gifted, or lost. Enki, the god of wisdom and water, was their keeper. After the flood, the texts say, Enki ensured the Me were preserved and redistributed. Civilization was rebuilt not from scratch, but from a template, a set of instructions that someone had safeguarded through the catastrophe. This is not a trivial detail. This is the Sumerians saying explicitly, what we have, we inherited. It was given to us. It survived the flood in a deliberate act of preservation. Look at the archaeological record of Sumer and you notice something deeply strange. Sumerian civilization appears, in geological terms, almost fully formed. Complex writing, within a few generations of its first appearance, is already being used for accounting, law, literature, and astronomy. The city of Eridu shows almost no primitive developmental phase. It appears, and it is already organized. Mainstream archaeology explains this as rapid indigenous development. But some researchers point to a simpler explanation, one the Sumerians themselves offered. They had help. They had a starting point. They had the Me. The knowledge didn't develop. It was recovered. Here is where we are. The Sumerians wrote, in what is demonstrably the oldest recorded literature on Earth, that there was an entire age of civilization before a catastrophic flood. They named its cities. They named its rulers. They described the event that ended it and the mechanism by which knowledge survived it. Geologists have confirmed a major cosmic impact event struck the Earth approximately 12,900 years ago, triggering climate collapse, flooding, and widespread destruction. Sea levels have risen 120 meters since the last ice age, submerging every coastline that would have been inhabited before that period. The cities the Sumerians named as pre-flood capitals have been excavated, and beneath their oldest layers, archaeologists keep finding flood deposits, clean silt, sterile layers, and below them, something older. None of this proves what the Sumerians wrote is a literal history, but it means the stories they told are not random. They are not primitive imagination. They encode something real, a memory, however distorted, of an actual epoch, an actual catastrophe. And here is what I keep returning to. The Sumerians said the flood was survived because one person was warned, because knowledge was deliberately preserved, because what was built before was not entirely lost. It was hidden in a different form, waiting to be recovered. The oldest written record on Earth says, "We are not the first." And everything we keep finding, under the ocean, under the sand, under the flood layers, says the same thing. The question is not whether there was something before us. The question is how much is still down there, waiting.